What we're doing today, we got 3 people from the Ethereum Foundation, myself, Danny, and Ken. I'm going to be talking about Ethereum 1.0 and 1x, as we're calling it. Danny's going to be talking about Ethereum 2.0, and Ken's going to be talking about Ethereum Foundation grants. So let's dive into it. Quick intro. My name's Hudson Jameson, like I said. Worked at USAA, the bank, for a little bit doing crypto stuff. Been with the Ethereum Foundation since 2016 and involved in Oaken Innovations, an IoT startup. I have 1 wife and 3 cats. Yeah, they're adorable, so just wanted to include them in the presentation. So yeah, we're going to go through Ethereum 1x, a little bit about DeFi, and a little bit about DAOs, because those are the big hot topics this year. So first of all, Ethereum 1x. If you remember one thing from today, just remember that Ethereum 1x is all about sustainability, which is a awesome hashtagged word that we came up with to describe how we're trying to make the Ethereum 1.0 chain sustainable. And what that means is we don't want it to grow too large that people are unable to run, Ethereum nodes. We don't want people to have issues with making their transactions too difficult. We're looking at different solutions for that, actually. So we're going to go through after this definition, which is, protocol changes and also different, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going through different processes for our organization of how we decide changes within the ecosystem. It's a really hard thing to get together and decide what changes are going to go into Ethereum because it's a decentralized organization, a decentralized ecosystem. So here's what we currently do to make decisions. What we have is different teams like Parity and Geth and Aleth, different clients. They are the smiley faces over there, and they come together and they prototype different implementations that the community decides through our improvement proposal process. We refine those improvement proposals, and then we have the testing team do testing vectors and things like that, and then finally that turns into consensus test. If you're looking at this is really waterfall model. It's like one thing at a time, and you don't start the next thing until the previous thing is complete. So we want something that's more agile. We want something that's more, oh, can we start my timer too? Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Something that allows us to be more flexible with the way that we make decisions at Ethereum in general. Yeah, so we have different ETH1x groups. We have state rent. That's kind of gonna maybe be a controversial one, but it is something that as blockchains become more bloated and as you're looking at scalability solutions, it's something that we are looking into. It's not final yet at all. There's still a lot of research to be done. And there's many, many different ways to kind of come up with state rent proposals and state rent strategies when you're concerning yourself with keeping dApps up to date, with dApps becoming a little bit wonky after you apply state rent to them. So we're going to have to work through those different things. The ETH2 finality gadget, you might hear a little bit about that during Danny's talk. It's basically using the ETH2 beacon chain to finalize ETH1 blocks. Beacon chain is like a super, in my opinion, complicated thing with ETH 2.0 where it goes and it validates. It correlates and validates different votes and blocks from the Ethereum 2.0 blockchain. Also, we're looking at generalized precompiles for elliptic curve arithmetics and pairings. This is so things like Handshake Protocol, Zcash, and stuff like that can be more interoperable with Ethereum, which I think is really cool. We're like besties with Zcash, and so we definitely want to get them more involved in what we're doing and have things like ZK snarks and ZK starks and all the other fun crypto terms involved with our protocol. There's also something called fee market change. That is where you split gas fees and transactions into two parts. One part gets destroyed and another part gets paid to miners. This is an economic change with the protocol that is meant to make gas a little bit more stable and to have more economic incentive for miners to stay on the network. There's a complete list at the link I posted there, and I'll post these slides to Twitter right after I'm done here if anyone's interested in going and clicking on some of the links here. Next, I'm going to talk about DeFi. Hopefully everyone's heard of DeFi. It's kind of the big thing right now. I don't truly participate in it that much, but I know it's a lot of people who are really excited about it because it's one of the use cases you can use on Ethereum today. It's a movement that leverages decentralized networks to transform old financial products into trustless and transparent protocols to run without intermediaries. So think about when you're going to Coinbase or Binance and you're trying to buy crypto, you're trusting Coinbase or Binance with your crypto. And what we're trying to do is come up with decentralized exchanges that have no intermediaries that you have to trust, and you can kind of do almost person-to-person trading using a slew of different strategies on the blockchain and smart contracts. There's things like Uniswap that is a decentralized exchange that's really popular. What I'm showing right now is DeFi Pulse, which kind of runs through and keeps up with how much money is in the DeFi ecosystem. Interesting thing about this, the top 4 Ethereum DeFi products have more money in them than the Lightning Network. So I thought that was really interesting to kind of show in comparison what the hype cycle is for certain products versus the reality of what's being used. Maker is an organization and a protocol that has a stable coin called DAI, and that is the premier stable coin on the in the Ethereum ecosystem that's more decentralized than other stable coins from bigger companies and things like that. So it's really widely used for our grants process, Gitcoin grants, and for a lot of the stuff in the DeFi ecosystem. Now we're going to talk about DAOs. DAOs are the other big thing this year, in my opinion. If anyone remembers the DAO, this is very different than the DAO. That was too ambitious too early, and it ended up failing. But after a few years and a lot of time to rethink security considerations, we're trying to bring back DAOs into the ecosystem because they're really important for proving out some of these decentralized and distributed concepts that Ethereum's all about. So if you don't know what they are, they're basically like these autonomous entities that people can join, and they don't have a leader necessarily, and they don't have a third party or an intermediary that's running things or able to steal money or things like that. They're designed to disintermediate things like companies, NGOs, foundations, things like that. So here's a little graphic that kind of shows how a DAO would work for voting. You could have DAOs for companies, you could have DAOs for voting. There's a few different DAOs that are really popular right now. The biggest one being Moloch DAO, which is a group of people on Ethereum who submit 100 Ether and then get voted into this organization that distributes money through ecosystem grants to different companies and organizations through proposals that are created. The Ethereum Foundation and Consensus just announced that they're joining Moloch DAO. They're going to have, I think, 10 votes per organization inside the DAO. So I thought that was really exciting that even bigger organizations are getting involved in these grassroots startup DAOs to kind of see how the ecosystem plays out. This is a screenshot of Aragon, which is a popular software for DAOs. You can create your own DAOs in just a few steps. So yeah, check Aragon out. I think it's really cool. I run an organization called the Ethereum Cat Herders, and we go through and do project management tasks in the ecosystem and kind of just help out by note-taking at meetings and things like that. And we have a DAO on Aragon that's really cool. So yeah, just to kind of go over everything again, sustainability, it's a lot of collaboration on improving the 1.0 chain until the 2.0 chain comes along. DeFi is the current Ethereum chain, churning out more MVPs than we have had ever with decentralized finance in mind. And then in general, we're tackling problems such as UX, scalability, and governance. And I think that we are, as a community, determined to come up with solutions for these things. And I think that we're doing an okay job. As long as we kind of keep this mindset of not taking ourselves too seriously and not being, different things like a hype machine, and just kind of heads down working and building, biddling, if you want to call it that, I think we'll do really well in the end. So thanks for listening to me. My name's Hudson Jameson again. You can find me on Twitter and my website. And I'm going to take a few minutes for questions.
I learned my lesson earlier this week. We need the mic.
Hi. Is the plan for the Ethereum 1.x chain to continue at the same time as Ethereum 2x, or is there going to be a hard stop and switch between the two?
The last time I heard, the Ethereum 1.0 chain is going to be a subpart of the Ethereum 2.0 chain on what's called a shard. Is that still right, Danny?
I'll talk about that a little bit.
Danny's going to talk about that a little bit, what's happening to 1.0 to 2.0. Other questions?
What is the leading...
Oh, wait for the mic real quick. Sorry.
It's just so much better with the mic.
What is the leading proposal for state rent?
The leading proposal for state rent right now is to have, let me see if I can so basically there's this guy named Alexei Akunev, and he's been doing different proposals. I think he's on proposal number 4 right now, so it's changed up a lot. But right now it's for different, basically you have your dApp, and you have to pay a certain amount of rent to keep it alive, and you can pay for other people's dApps to be kept alive. But what happens is if you don't pay your rent, then the dApp goes away. However, it can be what's called resurrected. So what that means is we have a separate process where we're keeping different Merkle proofs that will allow us to actually regain that information if you pay a resurrection fee and bring it back to life, basically. That's my understanding of the latest one, but there's like a lot of intricacies, so I'd suggest looking up Alexei's work. Cool. Other people?
Hi. With proof of stake, will there be an upper limit on how many Ether you could stake?
On how much Ether you can stake? That's a really cool question for Danny. So he'll be talking about that a little bit in the 2.0 talk, because I don't know the answer. Other questions?
So we're all aware of the DAO attack in 2016. So I'm just wondering, like, what have you guys done to, to prevent it from happening again? Or if it happens again, what is there like a refund mechanism, or how are you guys going to handle it?
Sure. So the DAO in 2016, I believe, was kind of a one-time event. I think Andreas Antonopoulos likes to liken it to a baby, like really early on in development of their life, trying to walk and hitting their head on a table. After they do that a couple times, or once even, they don't do it again because they've learned you don't hit your head on tables, you just watch out for them. And that's kind of what happened when we did the transaction changing, I guess, to give the money back to the DAO holders back in 2016. So now with Moloch DAO and others, we've simplified the DAO code is the first thing we did. So Moloch DAO is not that many lines of Solidity code compared to other major dApps. It only has a few different functions. So that makes it a little more secure, the simplicity behind it. There's also been audits behind this DAO code. There's a lot more security organizations than there were back then that can audit the code. In the event that the DAO gets hacked or the DAO gets in any way, like the funds get drained or things like that, then I think what would happen is that people would be really sad because their money's gone, but we wouldn't be able to do anything about it because you can't change the blockchain once an event has happened on it, unless there's widespread intervention from the community, in which case you would have an irregular state event. Other questions?
The one thing that has always been very unclear to me is how Ethereum is governed. I know the governance of Ethereum evolves over time. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what the current state is, because I know you, for example, yourself, you probably host a lot of these like monthly dev calls and so on. Like for instance, DeFi is pretty clear. Like there's a bunch of independent teams working on it, but in terms of protocol development on the base layer, like who's working on what and how is decision made?
Sure. So I'm intimately involved in the low-level protocol development as a coordinator. So to answer the question of what types of governance mechanisms we have formalized governance mechanisms, and that includes the core developer calls that happen every 2 weeks on Friday. I run those calls. They're recorded and video and audio. It's like a Zoom call, and we put them on YouTube. We've had, I believe, 57 of those calls dating back to 2015, 2016 period. And so we also have notes published with summaries so people can kind of stay up to date on the different decisions that are made. Additionally, we have the EIPs repository, which is the Ethereum Improvement Proposals. So that's the formal way that people make changes to the protocol or put in requests for standards like the ERC20 token. Those are the formal ways. The informal ways are discussions with some of the people, including developers, users, investors, on places like Twitter and Discord and Reddit about what steps to take. I guess, in my opinion, the governance mechanism right now can best be described as a technocracy, because the core developers are the ones who are coding in the changes for the low-level, base-level protocol. And so whenever they do that, they're making decisions based on feedback they've received from the community. We don't have a better way right now, in my opinion, because blockchain governance is really hard, and on-chain governance sucks. It sucks hard. So because of that, we don't want to do something that'll cause these powerful groups to rise up and take over pieces of the network like we've seen with EOS and Lisk and other cryptocurrencies. So I like how it is right now, even though it's not perfect. I mean, people have been trying to solve governance for, I guess, hundreds of years. So it's not going to be something easy to solve overnight. But yeah, in general, short answer, we have core developers who code the core protocol. They listen to feedback from the community, and they coordinate through EIPs and the core developer meetings. Cool.
Hello, my name is Danny Ryan. I work with the Ethereum Foundation on the research team. I spend most of my time working on research, specifications, some client development, a lot of client coordination around Ethereum 2.0. Ethereum 2.0 being a major protocol upgrade, moving Ethereum over to proof of stake and sharding, so kind of reaching the end goal of serenity as put out at the beginning in Ethereum. So first, I'd like to talk about where we've been. Much has happened in the past 12 months. Early 2018, we had so in 2017, Vitalik came out with the first idea of Ethereum 2.0 at DevCon in Cancun. It was going to involve this moving towards proof of stake using Casper FFG, and also adding sharding into the existing system. There was much work done on both of these parallel paths, that first being the hybrid proof of stake, proof of work, Casper FFG, which was going to manifest as a contract in the protocol, so a system level contract managing the validators, managing finality, et cetera. And similarly, the sharding was happening via the sharding manager contract, also a system level contract that was going to essentially bolt on the shards of the existing system. Much work was done on this. I spent most of my time at the time working on the hybrid proof of work, proof of stake stuff. We even on that front had some test nets and stuff moving forward. But there were some issues. Because we were doing things in the EVM, because some of the paths we were taking, it was going to limit how many validators could participate, and ultimately the decentralization of the system. And we had two different protocol games going on. We had the sharding game and the validator game. So we had validators in two different places, and we didn't want two core protocol games competing with each other. So in June 2018, we took a new direction. We deprecated both of these work streams. Short-term pain for ultimately what we see as a major, major long-term game. We decided to break out of the EVM and move towards a more radical design and re-architect the system in parallel to the existing system. This, again, this is incorporating much kind of cutting-edge research and techniques that were going to allow us to have a much more scalable and much more decentralized system in the end. So again, it was a little painful at the time, but we are making progress, and it's very exciting now. So mid-2018, this is kind of the research and design phase. We had kind of the vision of how these, we knew the research, we knew the different components that were going to come into the system, but it was a lot of proof of concepts and a proto-spec kind of existing at this point, trying to figure out how to put it all together into a concrete way. Through DevCon 4, more client teams were getting excited and getting involved with this. The spec moved to GitHub, at which we could better coordinate. We began to have fortnightly calls, workshops. This is a very cold workshop in Prague. Some prototypes. Again, the bones were in place, but still, over the coming months, major revisions to come on that spec. January 31st. This marks really, I think, the shift from a research project into a full-blown engineering effort. This is our first spec release, first very stable target for clients to dig into. Since then, a number of phase 0 requirements. So we're currently at V061. Phase 1, and I'll get into what phase 1 and phase 2 are. These are phase 1 and phase 2 are both in specification phase, and we have some initial client test nets. I think this is a just grab of me running a Nimbus node. You can actually, there's a couple of the clients have public test nets, so single client but public test nets that they're maintaining. Take a look, pull down a node, run a node. It's pretty exciting. See if your validator can make some money. So I want to talk a little bit about the architecture of this system. Sometimes when I talk to people, they're like, okay, I understand proof of work. I even understand Ethereum. I understand smart contracts. But all this new stuff, like this is really complicated. And yes, it is more complicated, but I do believe we can get an intuition for it. In general, proof of work handles a lot of the complexity, extra protocol, and the hardware. You get a lot by bringing that component of the system outside. But when you bring that in with proof of stake, you have to manage it more directly with the protocol. And then when you're sharding the system, obviously there's some complexity that comes there. So let's take a look. So this is, in general, what the design of the system looks like. Xiaowei Wang put this together, and it's badass. So the top of it is the existing proof of work chain chugging along in parallel to this new system. There is a loose coupling between what we call the beacon chain, which is kind of the proof of stake system chain, the core system level chain that's loosely connected to the proof of work chain. The proof of work chain in this system at first only really provides the economic seeds, so it provides a place for the ETH to deposit into the beacon chain. So what does this beacon chain do? As I have up there, it does finality, so it's where the Casper FFG finalizing and voting happens. It does an RNG, so it's a random number generator. It's where the balances of the validators exist, so the rewards and the penalties for doing a good or bad job happen. And it's also where the shuffling happens. So at any given time, the beacon chain dictates to you as a validator what your various role in the system is and what you need to be doing. So then we have these shard chains, which are kind of like attached to this beacon chain. So let's talk a little bit more about the beacon chain and the roles that you might have. So the first is producing blocks. Another is attesting to blocks. So a small subset get to produce blocks every once in a while, but many validators all at once get to attest, and they get to say, at this given time, I vote, and I say, this is the head of the chain. And so by doing that, those votes, they help the fork choice. And they also help, they're like a Casper FFG vote, so they finalize this beacon chain. Similarly, in parallel, we have these shard chains where at any given time, as a validator, a subset of validators are split across the shard chains. And I have similar duties in that sometimes I'm called upon to create a block, and very frequently I'm called upon to attest to these blocks and give weight to them in the fork choice. Another thing that I'm doing as a validator is I'm forming these cross links. So these links back from the green blocks back into the orange blocks are these references. So part of my job as a validator is I'm assigned to a shard. I go, I sync some recent data. I say, is the data available and is it valid? And I make a commitment to that back into the beacon chain. If enough commitments to these are made, a crosslink is formed. Crosslinks serve two primary roles. One is to anchor the shard chain back into the beacon chain to serve as the root of its fork choice. So to find the head of a shard chain, I find the head of the beacon chain, find the most recent crosslink for that shard chain, find the head of then work from there to find the head of the shard chain. They also serve as a layer 1 asynchronous communication mechanism between the shards. So if shard 1 wants to communicate to shard 10, shard 1 emits a receipt. That receipt, once a crosslink has been formed for shard 1 past that point, can then be consumed on shard 10. So this is I say a layer 1 asynchronous communication protocol. We have, check out ETH research. There's a lot of exciting research on layer 2 more opportunistic synchronous communication protocols. And then we have the execution environment, which is kind of like, sometimes we like to consider the data and the interpretation and execution of that data separately, so we can kind of isolate the components of the system. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So that's generally what's going on. It's kind of complicated, but not that complicated. Check out the specs. Most of our work is happening in ETH2.0-specs, or most of the specification work. There's lots of client development work happening in other repos, and a lot of the conversations happening in this Gitter. So outside the core architecture, we have serialization. We have this thing called tree hashing, where we can take any object, Merkleize it, and in such a way that has efficient hashing and also efficient ways to communicate and make proofs about it. We're using BLS 12381, which is a new advanced curve that a lot of people are coalescing on. We can do some fancy fun stuff with it, like doing BLS aggregate signatures and stuff. Networking and discovery. How do we discover the peers that are on different shards? That's kind of an interesting little area. And that couples well with, we're using libp2p, which is a framework by Protocol Labs. We've been really excited to work with them. We've been enhancing the protocols and working really tightly with them recently. libp2p has pub/sub capabilities, and particularly we're using gossip sub, which allows us to kind of shard the P2P network. Working on Merkle proof formats, light client protocols, test formats, all sorts of stuff. So the phase of development. We are dividing the phases, as I mentioned earlier, in phase 0, 1, and 2 to help manage the complexity. Let's take a look. Phase 0 is just this beacon chain. It's a proof of stake chain, the core system level chain, as I was discussing earlier. This is primarily what clients are targeting right now and what we intend to bring to production first. Each of these phases is layering a significant complexity, and so we want to bring it to mainnet in a incentivized, battle-tested environment before we bolt on the next layers of complexity. So if that's phase 0, phase 1 is adding the shard chains, but actually just adding consensus on data. So if we move to production with 1,024 shard chains, we expect to have This is 20 megabytes per second of data availability consensus. So this is, quite the engineering feat in and of itself. The relative complexity, though, from moving from the phase 0 to phase 1 is pretty minimal, and a lot of this is actually a networking challenge rather than a consensus challenge. Phase 2 is adding this, what I keep saying is a layer 1 execution and interpretation of that shard chain data. So this is when you actually get the user accounts, contracts, and the things that you know and love in existing Ethereum. I say layer 1 because you can actually take the shard chain data and you can interpret it however you want in a layer 2 environment. One potential use case with that layer 2 environment might be Ethereum 1.0, using that highly scalable data layer for scalability in the existing chain. State execution, there is some really incredible research going on. The way that this is diagrammed might actually be slightly altered. We're kind of created a more, even more abstract, highly extensible version of this, which relies upon some things called execution scripts living in the beacon chain. If you're into that stuff, check out ETH Research. There's some really kind of mind-bending, really cool stuff with state execution going on right now. So orthogonally, we have these 1.0 phases. These are maybe not canonical letters, but I'd throw them up there. This is not quite 1x, although the finality gadget was being discussed in the context of 1x. This is just how can we use, through the development of phase 0, 1, and 2, how can we use Ethereum 2.0 to enhance the existing Ethereum 1.0 chain while we're on the journey. So phase A would be utilizing the beacon chain to finalize the existing proof of work chain. By doing this, we can leverage the security of the validators and not rely as much on the miners and potentially reduce rewards over time as we wean off of the 1.0 chain. Phase B would be to expose the 2.0 beacon chain state root in 1.0. And by doing that, the beacon chain state root, because of the Merkle tree mechanism, actually you can make proofs, Merkle proofs about all of the shard chain data. And so once we expose the 2.0 state root in 1.0, we can leverage the shard chain data to do all sorts of fun stuff, like using it as a data availability engine for things like ZK rollup. Phase C, this is definitely an unknown one, but there's a little bit of demand to have 1.0 to 2.0 ETH fungibility. Depending on the trajectory of the development of the time and the priorities, we may or may not do that. But once we have the state roots exposed, there is that functionality that could be available. And then phase D is really, what is the long-term plan for the Ethereum 1.0 chain? There's two possible futures in my mind. One is that we finalize the 1.0 chain with 2.0. We highly just use the security of the 2.0 chain and diminish rewards to a point where it's not, there's not a crazy inflation going on in there. And we just have these systems live in parallel, tightly connected, but and the ability to make certain proofs and certain communications across the protocols, but just going on their own for a long time. That's probably the easy way, and potentially the route. I'm more into the idea of finding a way to roll 1.0 into 2.0. I mentioned that we're going down a path, a very abstract path with state execution in 2.0 that allows for these things called execution scripts. And ideally, in my mind, we make one of those execution scripts an EVM interpreter written in WASM, fork the ETH balances into there, and have 1.0 fully rolled into 2.0, and we get to fully deprecate the system. There's a balance here, debate, depending on technical complexity, what the community wants, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of movement on phase A of this, at least. Read more about the finality gadget here. There's a recent really good post. Alex Stokes goes into the details. And there's a working group formed on ETH Magicians to begin to further investigate, prototype, et cetera. Hopefully, you'll see some cool stuff over the summer. So the path from here. There's over 100 people contributing to this project. There are many clients of different sizes and different progression of development at this point. There's a lot of community members involved. There's our research team, a lot of people at EF working on this, all sorts of people. It's very, very exciting, and I'm fortunate that I do a lot of the communication around this project, that I get to work with incredible people. Okay, so what's happening over the next few quarters? At the end of Q2, we're going to have a phase 0 spec freeze. We're going to be stabilizing and optimizing these existing clients. We're going to see more single client and multi-client short-lived testnets. Continued phase 1 spec development. As the phase 2 stuff, obviously I'm very excited. There's a little bit more research to do, but we're also moving towards the specifications in that front. A lot of upcoming client challenges. Thank your client developers. They do all of the hard work. I mean, everyone does all the hard work, but like making a client's hard, and I really respect these guys. So we have some initial consensus tests that they're working on passing. Some of them are like really working on optimizations, like they want to handle up to 4 million validators, which is never going to happen in practice, but that's if all ETH was validating ever, which I think even in the craziest, like you'd never have more than 40 million ETH validating. But so people are trying to make sure their clients can run, working on efficient aggregation strategies, so aggregating these BLS aggregate signatures in efficient ways, working on stable networks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Q3, we're already engaging in some audits and formal verification. We're going to see a lot of that over Q3. Cross-client CI, we're also working on fuzzing. Guido, who was like this badass fuzzer, has done a lot of work on 1.0. Recently, we've been talking with him, and he's going to start doing some fuzzing. Very excited about that. Stressing, doing some stress tests on the network, making sure libPDP is up to snuff. We're going to see some long-standing multi-client test nets, and lots of phase 1 and phase 2 spec development. And prototyping on both throughout. Q4, we're going to start seeing very stable, getting towards production grade clients, figuring out at that point when is the good time to launch. Phase 1 will be stable in development. Phase 2, I imagine, is going to be very mature at that point. We have a lot of people that are working on prototyping at this point, so who knows? We'll see. TLDR, it's happening. Thank you. Questions? I can answer the question about the max ETH for validating, or max, I think was the question. So we actually, all validators are 32 ETH instances. And so if I want to participate with 64 ETH, I actually am 2 validators. I'm 2 different public keys in the system. And so when I'm talking about validators, these are like logical entities in the consensus, but many validators might run on one node. So I might run 10 validators, 3,200 ETH, or 320 ETH, from a single node in the network. So there's going to be some distribution of like validator entities that are distributed across some probably smaller subset of nodes. Does that answer the question kind of? So, but there's no maximum that you can participate with. Because your duties to shards increase the more of these 32 instances you participate with, there's a certain maximum you're going to be able to participate with on a machine, but then you can have any number of machines. And you can have 1 validator run 10 machines if you think that's right for your security model. What's the reward? You get ETH. It's dynamic depending on the amount of validators. So it scales by the square root of the number of validating. So at 10 million ETH, I believe we're targeting something in the range of 5% returns. But at 2.5, that means 2.5 million, it'd be double that, so 10%. And then at 40 million, it's like 2.5%. So it's this function where although we'd love to see like a healthy ecosystem of about 10 million ETH validating, ultimately you have these parameters in place, and similar to proof of work, it's a slightly different function. It naturally finds an equilibrium where people, depending on the rate of return, will decide to validate or not as the network kind of adjusts. And at the beginning, I expect a much lower number because it's a much higher risk environment. And so you will see a higher return at that point. But over time, I imagine it to stabilize into a much more conservative return.
To follow up on that, does that mean the inflation rate be about the same proof of stake as over proof of work?
So even if 40 million, at the current numbers we're discussing, even if 40 million validators, 40 million ETH is validating, there'd be less than 1% inflation per year. And so really the numbers the 2 numbers that are dictating some of these, the thoughts here are what is a reasonable return for validators, yet what is a reasonable rate of inflation for the users at large. And so you kind of have these two things push and pulling on each other. So if only 10 million is validating, but it's 5% on 10 million, it's not 5% on the entire inflation, right? So again, yeah, in any reasonable numbers that are validating, like it's going to be less than 1% inflation.
How does that compare with the work today?
I think proof of work's something like 6 or 7% inflation today. So it's significantly less.
All the diagrams you showed an ongoing proof of work chain.
Yes.
That's anticipated to go, that's part of the design for the...
Currently, yes. I did mention that there is a path to figure out how to roll in the proof of work chain into the actual 2.0 design. But as we launch phase 0, 1, and 2, the existing proof of work chain, we have a lot going on there. We don't really want to disrupt it. One of the reasons that we are re-architecting the system in parallel is so that we can move very quickly while we have this plane in flight. And so although we do plan to use Ethereum 2.0 to enhance the existing chain and to finalize it and potentially do some stuff over there, these systems, at least for the next couple of years, are going to run in parallel. I would like to. There's a couple of different paths. One would be to finalize it and reduce the rewards significantly and have it run in parallel forever, or until it's as long as it's economically viable. I find the slightly more technically challenging path of rolling it in a little bit more palatable.
I'm Ken. Hi. I'm going to talk about the Ethereum Foundation grants program. Just give you an update on where we are, how things are going. They're amazing, by the way. And really just thank you all for being here. I know like Joe and Vlad are talking, but you're here with us, which is cool. So this, like being here is actually really awesome because yeah, it's all good. So so a couple of years ago, when I had the first consensus, I was here because of the hackathon. And that was really cool because I also snuck into the conference because I can't afford it. But the hackathon was cool because I came up with this idea, and it was like, this is my first maybe a couple months of just reading the white paper, the Ethereum white paper, the Bitcoin white paper, and I was like, this is fucking awesome, right? So I'm here at this hackathon, come up with this crazy idea, and I was like, there's no way that this is like ever going to be anything. And then I spoke to John Wolpert, and he was like, this is amazing, right? And so that really kind of validated and kind of inspired me to keep going in. And it was like, you know what, you're right. I'm going to leave my consulting job, and I'm going to dive deep into blockchain with no idea what that actually means. So I promise you, there is a reason why I brought up that anecdote, besides to stroke myself. It is really cool. And so the one thing that I do want to talk about is the grants program itself is really something that I think is and has been really by and for people, right? Developers, people enthusiastic and inspired in the space. The grants program, the philosophy of the grants program has really been to kind of leverage all the resources that the Ethereum Foundation has. And we say to expand the boundaries of Ethereum into new territories while also addressing the most urgent needs, and I'm reading right now, most urgent needs of the ecosystem and the community. And so that's very vague, right? But really what we're trying to own in on there is just to make sure that everything that we're funding and everything that we're allocating resources to is moving the Ethereum ecosystem forward. And that has multiple meanings. It manifests in very different ways. That is in all the categories that we fund, have given grants to, right? So whether they're 2.0 clients, whether it's 1.x work, right? Whether it's hackternships, which are just, pull you away from your job and work on cool projects. It could be research, and that's any type of research, right? It's not just Ethereum research, it's crypto primitives, it's really just things that will advance the technology itself. It's developer experience, it's developer tooling, it's usability, it's education, security, all these things that make Ethereum work and make it better. So there's a little typo here. The grants program we started in 2018, and since then we have granted over $27 million to 92 projects. And this is really awesome, right? So for scalability, we have granted about $13 million, over $13 million. And just across the board, there's so many different things that we also have given grants to that just don't fall really within one bucket. It kind of straddles different buckets, but yeah, I think the important thing to take away from there is our focus is really on maximizing impact. It's really focusing on how much are we actually going to push the ecosystem forward. So that's awesome. We've also been very kind of open, and you know, we want to be there for the community. We want to show that there's really nothing, there's no secret sauce behind like what we're doing, right? We are a grants program. We want to make sure that everyone feels like they have had a fair shot at all of this, right? All it is a very distributed and decentralized decision-making process. Kind of like in scientific research, right? You have peer-reviewed evaluations. For us, you know, it's just an application. It used to be on a Google form. We have now upgraded to a type form. So, you know, a little fancier. So they're inbound applications. There's also source applications. If you reach out to anyone within at the Ethereum Foundation or any of the external advisors, anyone who's been a part of the process, they're more than happy to send you over to us, and we have conversations. The initial evaluation it is a couple of us on the grants team, as well as I think we have over 130 external advisors that we tap into. The next stage is 1 to 2 interviews. There we kind of really own in on what that grant scope is, really refine the most highest affinity project that we can come out with, figure out what it is that you actually need from a grant, right? And we'll talk more about support in a little bit. Then a decision is made, and you see them on our Ethereum Foundation grants blog posts. The process itself is rolling. We announce grants as a convenient way to actually just publish all the teams and people who have been given grants. But it is a rolling process. Things are always in the pipeline. They're always churning. And I guess one of the bigger questions we get is, you know, like how do you guys even evaluate, especially across the board? There's so many different ways you can kind of take it, and a lot of it is very subjective. But objectively, when you look at impact, the key questions we ask internally are, you know, how important is the problem that the team is addressing, right? How urgent is this problem? And how unique is the problem, right? How unique is the solution? The problem can also be unique. But are there other things being worked on in the space? And why is this beneficial, or why is this superior to what's already out there? And I think this is kind of the most underrated question. It's what additional happens when there is a grant awarded, right? Regardless of whether it's financial grant, whether it's support, whether it's, you know, mentorship or dev help, the big thing is what else happens, right? What are second order effects? If we give this grant, will this signal a chilling effect to the rest of the community? Do we really want to make sure that grants don't have a chilling effect, right? We don't want there to be any sort of king-making involved. So we are really cognizant of, you know, when these decisions get made and how this affects everyone else. Cool. Oops, whoops. So we'll jump into the most recent grants wave. If you saw Aya's talk at Ethereum, we kind of loosely announced these guys. The Raven Sensor Network, super badass. Honeypots, you're really detecting network in real time. Tabuki, gas station network. Relayers, this like kind of pushes us past the border of just, you know, you're running dApps without needing to worry about gas fees. That's crazy. Statebox is really cool. Composition language, which allows you to make sure that no matter what language you use, you're still formally verified. Formal verification is something that is hugely important. If you guys don't know what it is, you should definitely learn about formal verification. So Harmony, L4, Plasma Group, all scalability clients, scalability grants. Harmony, of course, they're working on their 2.0 client. L4 working on state channels using the counterfactual. Plasma Group, Plasma, obviously. And then Ferran, I don't want to mess up his last name, but Agrero is working on ETH1X work. So, great question. How can we help? Amazing. Thanks, guys. Really good question. So, how can we help? We can start with some truths, right? What we can kind of find as a baseline is research innovation is really hard, right? It's not easy. It just doesn't come naturally unless you're Vitalik. Finding help is super hard. It really is. What is help though, right? So let's get into it. So what is being worked on, right? What is out there? What's being worked on? What can we actually, like, what does that even mean, right? Like, what cool projects are being worked on? What problems are there out there? How do we address these things? Very, very, it can be anything, right? And that's what I want to kind of stress for the grants program. Literally anything can come through the pipeline. We want to make sure that we can help answer these questions. We want to know what is being worked on. We have a ton of people that we rely on. We're super open. We love talking to people, but we don't have ears everywhere, and that's kind of the problem, right? We want to see everything come in, and what I spoke about at DevCon was just apply, right? The worst thing that can happen is we call you or like we email you and say, hey, sorry, this we probably won't be funding this, or we won't be giving a grant to this. But we do want to know what it is that's being worked on. Now, the next couple questions are a little different, right? So the who is building something, right? And like who is funding it? So on the one side, you have the people, the teams, the projects, organizations who are working on things, coming out of hackathons, or they quit their job and now they're working on this really cool idea that they thought of, these dApps. What are they building? Who are they? How do we find them, right? On the funder's perspective, not just us, there are so many other organizations in the Ethereum ecosystem that give out grants, that do some sort of funding, whether it's safes or just ways to make sure that there are kind of more incentivized alignment, partnerships, integration. The ecosystem is out there, and there are so many people out there that are giving out funding, giving out support. This is really hard, right? It's really hard to kind of find everyone that is allocating resources to these initiatives. So the one thing that I want to note here is that the Ethereum Foundation, we want to help everyone kind of sift through the mess of funding sources, right? I think recently there have been a couple reports, one by CoinGecko, one by I think Mark Weinstein, I think that's his name, and Jamie Pitts from the Ethereum Foundation, just laying out who in the ecosystem is actually providing funds, who is giving out resources, who is providing dev help. It's not common knowledge and it's not publicly advertised, all the groups that are providing resource allocation. So we want to be there. If you have these questions, ask us, right? We want to be approachable. We are at EF Grants on Twitter, right? I'm on Twitter. We're all on Twitter. Just ping us. Now the next question is how, right? Like how do we actually find this support, and like how as an organization, how do we support these projects? How do we find these people out there? How do we find these how do we find these projects, these teams? And these are really good questions, right? There are so many events happening in Ethereum space, right? There's this one. There's ETH New York, all the ETH Global events. There's so many like Ethereum conferences that are out there that are just grassroots movements. So at all of these events, you can really just find anybody and just ask them, what else is happening, right? Like, what else are you guys working on? Can we provide help? Or like, are you guys looking for implementation partners? Or we want to implement one with you. Everyone in the space is super, super, at least I have found everyone to be extremely helpful, and they want to work together. But in terms of just maximizing impact, I do want to make sure that if you are lost, or if you ever feel like you don't know where to go, or if you have an idea that you want validated, feel free to reach out to us on the grants team. I'm about to get kicked off soon, but I also want to kind of point out, impact is one of the bigger and more undefined or ill-defined subjective quantities of grants programs. For us, I really want to lay out, there's so many teams working on very cool things, and it's not necessarily always something that is, extreme innovation, right? It's also just Gitcoin, ETH Global, getting people activated, getting people into different projects, getting people wanting to work on other stuff. Obviously, there's the scalability stuff, super important. The 2.0 clients, there's layer 2, the 1x movement, all that stuff is super important. ZK rollups. But there's also things like Uniswap, right? Where Uniswap has been, and Hudson touched on this, being able to be the 4th liquidity provider, and just knowing that it was Hayden pretty much alone with the community helping out, and there was not a lot of money into this, right? We gave Hayden a $50,000 grant. He had help from a ton of people in the community, and this was really something that people just enjoyed working on, right? And that to me is the most inspiring thing. When you just latch onto your project that you're just super excited by and just dive in. And then there's also Secure Scuttlebutt, right? That whole team, amazing people working on the standalone client, and then not just, they got a grant to work on the standalone client for dark crystals, for key management, if you guys don't know. Very cool. Forget private keys. It's really just remembering who you gave your shards to, your crystals to. And then they kind of blew it out of the water and said, let's also work on crypto primitives. Let's work on, SecP 256K. Let's work on like actual cryptographic primitives. So these are subjective outcomes that are really hard to kind of pinpoint and say across the board, this is what's going to make a successful project. Because the real answer is there is no secret sauce, right? There's no one thing that makes you a perfect grantee, that makes you a shoo-in for a grant. So I guess I'll leave it with that, right? Like, apply for a grant today. Speak to us. Ask us what we can do to help you. We're here to serve the community. And so, if you have a crazy idea, just hit us with it, right? Like, let us validate you. Be me from 3 years ago. And just talk to us. Yeah, thank you all so much. I guess questions? Questions? No. Cool. Awesome,
Actually,
guys.
I have a question.
Oh, you do? Okay. I thought that was going to be a cool,
What is the budget, I guess current, and I guess if there's any potential increase in the future for the grants program? The first part of the question. Second part, does that budget come from like the current treasury, of Ethereum Ether tokens held by the foundation, or is there any other source?
Yeah. So in terms of budget, so I had said in our presentation last week at Ethereum, we plan on spending $30 million to stimulate the ecosystem, right? In terms of ETH prices and our treasury, that's online. Vitalik, I think, had a Reddit post a couple weeks ago about where we stand. And you can also, if you just Google Ethereum Foundation wallet, you can find our wallet, right? It's all out there. So I mean, yes, the grants will take from the Ethereum Foundation wallet, but what is actually really exciting, and that's a really cool question. What's been really exciting for me is to actually see other people get excited by projects, other organizations see projects, and they're like, we want to be a part of that too. And so now we've created this cycle of collaborative financing, which is really awesome. And this happens all the time in traditional grant programs where you have collaborative grant making, right? You have certain projects that are applying to multiple programs, and you get funded by multiple programs. And this really aligns incentives in the sense that you're making sure that there is, right off the bat, implementation partners. You're working on strategic partnerships. You're working on different levels of support, right? So it's not just financial. It's really that mentorship that you're owning into. It's not just the Ethereum Foundation researchers. It's also, so for example, ECF guys, they funded many, many teams, and they're a group of ICO projects, right? They're Mise, Web3, Maker, right? If you're funded by both us and them, you have all of these resources at your disposal, which is the most beautiful thing about this ecosystem, right? Same thing with Moloch DAO, right? If you're funded by them, you know everyone who has voted, or I guess most of the people who are on Moloch, and you can tap into them and say, hey, we just got funded. Can we get your support? Can we actually implement? Who do we talk to? So that's actually really exciting, right? So it's not, so yes, right? EF grants program is EF budget. But I really like what's happening today and what's been happening the last couple of months and the last, it's like 6 months of just collaborative grant making, where you're really expanding what that budget means, right? Expanding that whole resource allocation mentality of taking an ecosystem level approach. What can we give you to support you, right? That's super cool. Anything else before I hop out? Cool. Thanks, guys.